Richard's bodies were found in the fire. Both of them were dead before firefighters could even get there. However, they hadn't died in the fire, and police figured this out very quickly. They'd actually died from gunshot wounds. Helen's body was found bound and gagged. She'd been shot in the head once, and so had Richard. They both suffered one gunshot wound to the head. So an immediate theory in this case was that perhaps this had been a murder-suicide. Perhaps Richard had bound and gagged his sister, killed her, and then killed himself. However, when the bodies were taken for an autopsy, it was discovered that Richard actually had more than just the one gunshot wound that police saw originally. He also had one in his abdomen. So it was unlikely that this was a murder-suicide. Not only that, but he also had an unexplained head injury. So it seemed as though he had also been attacked by someone, just like Helen had. And Richard's autopsy also showed up that he'd had a sexual encounter with a man, probably on that day. The next theory, and the more widely believed theory, is that this was a robbery gone wrong. Perhaps someone had broken in, just planning on robbing the house, and then maybe one of the siblings disturbed them, and this person that broke in panicked and got rid of witnesses. Police believe that this house in particular was targeted because maybe this person that was breaking in and trying to rob the house thought that Helen was home alone. Maybe Richard came home as the attack was going on, or maybe he was there the whole time and this person that was breaking in just had no idea. They believe that it was Richard that probably disturbed this attacker, and so maybe in that moment this person thought it would be the easiest solution to get rid of both witnesses and then get rid of the evidence of their double murder by setting the house alight. The fire had been started with diesel as well, so whoever set fire to the house wanted to speed up the process. They wanted this house to burn down fast. But then that also begs the question, well, where did this attacker, this person that was pulling an armed robbery on the house, where did they find this diesel? Where did they find so much diesel to burn a house? Was this planned? Did they plan to bring diesel with them to rob a house and then burn it down? I mean, this was a farmhouse, this was a farm, so they probably did have diesel somewhere, but it's like, did the armed robber know where to find that diesel and how much they used to burn the house down? There's a lot of different theories here. Was this premeditated? If it was, did they know who they were killing, or did they just set out to kill someone? Did they just set out to rob someone and then it went wrong? So police immediately got to work. However, as soon as they started, they knew that this was going to be such a hard investigation to solve because everything had burned down. The whole house had burned down, all evidence was burned. Everything was just ash. There was nothing to go off really at all, which is, exactly what the killer wanted. That's exactly why they burned the house down with diesel, because they knew police wouldn't be able to find them. The remaining Thomas family put up a reward for anyone that could bring forward any information that led to a conviction. However, this didn't bring any substantial leads. They quickly established a timeline of events of the siblings that day. That morning, Helen went to church. She was there all morning while Richard stayed on the farm and he was speaking with workers. They were both accounted for in the morning. The two of them had lunch together around 12:30. This was something they did every single day, pretty much at the exact same time. And then around an hour later, around 1:30 p.m, Richard Thomas is seen driving to a nearby town called Nayland. And that is the last confirmed sighting of Richard. So from this, police began speaking to people in Nayland. They were kind of campaigning more in Nayland because they knew that he was heading there on the day that he was killed. And one woman came forward to tell police that she'd actually seen Richard Thomas in Nayland a few different times, not on the day of his murder, but she'd seen him a few different times doing the same thing. You can assume that he was probably doing the same thing again on the day of his murder. She said that he would drive up in his car and park on her street, kind of outside of her house, and then a blue Land Rover would drive up. Richard would get out of his car, get in the blue Land Rover, and they would drive off together. I just want to repeat that she didn't actually see him do this on the day of his murder, but she'd seen him do this multiple times, like at least every week. So it's assumed that that was probably what he was doing in Nayland. He didn't do much else in Nayland other than that. And this really interested police. Who was this blue Land Rover? Who was driving it? Where were they going? Was this kind of a secret meeting? Was this a lover? Was this a relationship that he had that no one really knew about? It seemed secretive. It seemed like he and this person didn't want anyone to know that they were meeting. One of the theories is that this was a secret boyfriend of Richard's, because like I said, his autopsy showed that he did have a sexual encounter with another man on the day of his murder. So it seemed that perhaps that was his boyfriend, and maybe he hadn't told anyone that he had a boyfriend, and so that's why this was such a secret meeting. Notice that I do keep calling this a sexual encounter, because I don't believe it was sexual assault from his attacker or his killer. The pathologist noted that it was earlier in the day of his murder. It wasn't around the time of his murder, so I don't think it was related to his murder. I think it was just a separate event that happened earlier on in the day. So now police are looking for the owner of this blue Land Rover. Potentially they're a suspect in this crime, or if not, they just know what Richard Thomas was doing that day. They kind of have a better idea of his life. Whoever this blue Land Rover owner was, police wanted to speak with them. A while into the investigation, police learned that Richard Thomas often liked to go to the cinema late at night to watch the adult films, and he didn't do it alone. He was often seen sitting in the theatre with a large bearded man, and so police are thinking, okay, could this be the blue Land Rover owner? Is this his friend, his lover, his boyfriend? So police were campaigning more in that line of inquiry for a lot of this case. That was kind of what they were focused on, because that's the only lead that they had. They were campaigning for anyone to come forward about a blue Land Rover or about a large bearded man that liked to watch the adult films late at night. However, that kind of line of inquiry quickly dried up. There were reports of a bearded man seen close to the farmhouse, kind of staring in the direction of the farmhouse on the day of the murder around 7 p.m. However, the person that saw this bearded man says that this man was kind of tall and slim, which doesn't match the kind of large bearded man from the cinema. So maybe it's not the same man, but maybe this other bearded man is a person of interest. But also, there were reports of a blue Land Rover being seen around the farmhouse, again around 7 p.m. that night. So was this the same man, and was this blue Land Rover owner the bearded man? But like I said, these inquiries didn't really lead anywhere. It was very hard for police, because this did seem like it was a secret relationship between Richard and this blue Land Rover man, so it was unlikely that anyone knew that the two of them were associated. It was very unlikely that they were going to get the blue Land Rover man to bring himself forward if he was keeping this part of his life a secret. Going back to the timeline of events, police know that the two of them, Helen and Richard, were both alive at 9 p.m. that night. They were both in the house. Helen took a call from one of her tenants around 9 p.m. that night, so that's how they know that everything was fine in the house. And then within an hour of that phone call, the murders took place between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. that night. Police and pathologists are able to pinpoint exactly when the murder happened. So they believe that the murders happened just before 10 p.m. and then the fires were set pretty much exactly at 10 p.m. And then police actually had a witness come forward to say that around 10 past 10 that night, so 10 minutes after the fires were set, so this would have been around the time that the killer was fleeing the scene, this witness saw a blue Land Rover racing away from the house. And the reason this blue Land Rover stuck in this witness's mind so much is because they were driving so fast and so reckless that they were on the wrong side of the road. They were driving right at this witness. But even despite all of these leads, this blue Land Rover seemed like such a key piece of evidence. This case quickly went cold. There was nothing police could do if no one was going to come forward. There were no cameras. It was very hard for police, and this case did quickly go cold. And it remained a cold case for about 4 years afterwards. That was until another double murder happened in that general area that caught police's eye. Again, a man and a woman in their 50s, a very similar victim profile to Richard and Helen Thomas. However, this time it was a couple named Peter and Gwenda Dixon. 51-year-old Peter Dixon and 52-year-old Gwenda Dixon had been married for 27 years with 2 children, and both these children were adults now. The Dixons were from Oxford, however, they liked to go to Pembrokeshire whenever they wanted a holiday. They were a very outdoorsy, very naturistic couple, and this particular area of Pembrokeshire had some really nice hiking trails, really nice views. Like I said, it was coastal, so you could walk up to the top of the cliffs and see the sea down below you, and they liked to stay in a village called Little Haven. They holidayed in this particular village for, I think, 12 years in a row. They really liked this area, basically. And on June 29th of 1989, the couple had been on a 2-week holiday, and this was their last day. They'd been camping at a local campsite, and they decided
I do not like using
on that
this.
morning they were going to leave their tent to dry because it had been raining, and they were going to go for one last walk along the coastal line. They planned a full route. It was going to take them up through some woods. They were going to go up onto a cliff and look at the sea. They were going to come back down, They'd planned this. It was a route that they really liked to take. And so before they left, they spoke with some other campers on this campsite and just told them where they were going, what they were doing, and that it was their last day. So Peter and Gwenda set off on this walk around 9:30 a.m. and they planned to be back at the campsite for around 12 o'clock midday so that they could pack up their things and leave. However, Peter and Gwenda didn't return from this walk. A few days later, the couple's family, particularly their son and daughter, were growing more and more concerned that they hadn't heard from their parents. They knew that their parents were going on holiday for 2 weeks and they'd be camping and stuff, so maybe the service wasn't very good, but they knew that their parents should have been back by now. And so they decided to get in contact with the campsite owner to see if maybe they'd just stayed.
I like this one less.
Like I said, the Dixons had been going to this particular campsite in Pembrokeshire for the past 12, 14, 16 years. I can't remember how long exactly, but a very long time. They knew the campsite owner very well. And so they got in contact with the owner, and she said that the Dixons' tent and their car was still there. However, she hadn't actually seen Peter or Gwenda for a couple of days. Now, this was very concerning to everyone that knew Peter and Gwenda. They weren't the kind of people to just go off and leave and not contact anyone. And so following this phone call, the campsite owner decided to call the police and report Peter and Gwenda as missing. And when police arrived at the campsite, they had a look at the tent, they had a look at the car, and all of their belongings were still inside. Nothing inside the tent seemed amiss. It wasn't like there was, damage or blood or anything. There was nothing. It really did seem as though they'd just gone out on a walk and not returned. This disappearance was immediately concerning because, yes, it was very out of character, but also it was unlikely that the couple had just gotten lost because they knew this area so well. Like I said, they'd been going for 12, 14, 16 years. So one of the first things that police did was try to track the couple's credit cards, debit cards, in case they'd decided to buy a train ticket somewhere, pay for a hotel somewhere, they'd be able to tell, And they did find activity on Peter Dixon's card on the day that they went missing. It was used at an ATM in the town around 1:30 p.m. and whoever had used it had tried to withdraw £37. A very
I didn't trash it. I'm building on it.
Value. Most cash machines, most ATMs only dispense
I am
10s
still paying
and 20s and 5s. 37 is such an odd number, they don't dispense coins. Anyway, this failed for whoever was trying to get £37 out, and so instead they decided to just get £10 out, which again is very strange. When they wanted £37, you would get 40 out, would you not? So then that covers the 37 instead of just 10 instead. The card was then used again at 4 p.m. at a different ATM in the same town, this time withdrawing £100 in cash. And the card was then used again a number of times over the next couple of days. And so police, because they knew exactly what time and what ATM this card was used at, they could use that to campaign for any witnesses to come forward that might have seen someone withdrawing money from that exact ATM at that exact time, because that was who was using Peter Dixon's card. And one witness came forward and said that they remembered being there at that time, and they agreed to make a police sketch of the man that they saw withdrawing money from that ATM. And they created this sketch. Now, that doesn't look like Peter Dixon. Meanwhile, there was still no sign of the Dixons. They hadn't gotten in contact with anyone, they hadn't texted, called anyone, they hadn't returned to their campsite, and all of their things were there, their car, everything they owned, or everything they'd at least taken with them. And it was quite concerning, considering that they had taken a cliffside route. There was always the worry that
not a lefty.
Slipped or fallen.
Remember, this
or
stuff is this stuff is
there were a lot of
reversed.
coastal police out in boats and in helicopters trying to kind of examine the area, see if there was anyone that needed help. However, down the side of the cliff, there was a lot of foliage, a lot of trees, and so it was likely that if they had slipped and fallen, that they would be covered by trees. They would be very hard to see in a helicopter. And the worst case scenario became a reality. On July 5th, when police sniffer dogs alerted to the scent of decomposing body just off the side of the cliff. And so police went to investigate, and there they found 2 dead bodies, a male and female, later identified as Peter and Gwenda Dixon. The 2 of them seemed to have been shot to death. Gwenda just once in the face, and Peter 3 times, in the chest, in the back, and again in the face at point-blank range. Gwenda's body was found just a few feet from the cliffside, so she was actually still up in the kind of woods area, and she was partially undressed from the waist down, suggesting that some kind of sexual assault had taken place from her attacker. And Peter's body was found dangling from the cliff's side, caught in some trees. His hands were tied behind his back, and his wallet and wedding ring were gone. And it seemed as though these items had been stolen before Peter was killed, because of course whoever was using his credit card had his PIN number. They knew how to withdraw money, so it's likely that they demanded his PIN code from him before they killed him. And so that is what this investigation primarily focused on when they were trying to find a suspect, is that man that was seen withdrawing money from that ATM.
I need to get paint
As part
markers.
of
This
search
sucks.
for a suspect, over 6,000 people were interviewed. So that's people from Pembrokeshire, people that worked in the area might have seen this person withdrawing money, people that knew the Dixons, so even people back in Oxford, other holidaymakers, other people that had been to that campsite, and so many people were interviewed. It seemed as though this double murder was a premeditated attack, but with random victims. It didn't seem as though the Dixons were particularly targeted, but it seemed as though their attacker, their killer, had set out that day to kill someone. It was unclear what the motive was. Yes, there was a robbery, but was that just a byproduct of the killing? Did this person, this murderer, set out to kill someone and then just happen to rob them afterwards because they could? Or did they set out to rob someone and then this went wrong? Maybe the couple fought back. They weren't going to let this person take their things, and so that was when this person killed them. It was unclear what exactly happened. But I mean, the Dixons weren't the type to fight back, and they were tied up. So it seemed as though their killer didn't deem them as a threat anywhere. If their hands are tied behind their back, what are they going to do? The killer had no reason to shoot them at that point because the killer's life wasn't in danger. So were they just killing them to get rid of witnesses, or were they just killing them to kill them? Also, what was the reason for them shooting Peter Dixon 3 times and Gwenda only once? Was Peter putting up a bit of a fight, or was the killer just enjoying this? A few weeks into the investigation, police finally got their first person of interest, a local farm labourer in southwest Wales named John Cooper. John Cooper was brought to police's attention by a local pawnbroker who had bought a wedding ring from John in early July. Of course, the pawn shop owner didn't think too much of it at first, because pawn shops are always buying rings, different jewellery, you know. So it wasn't a weird thing to happen. However, later on when they learned that Peter Dixon, the murder victim, had his wedding ring stolen when he was killed, this pawn shop owner put two and two together and suspected Cooper, and so they put his name forward to the police. So police called in John Cooper to the police station, and they just wanted to know about this ring and whose ring it was, why he sold it, whatever. And he said it was his wedding ring. He recently split from his wife. He kind of needed the money, and so he just pawned off his wedding ring. And there was no way to prove that it wasn't his, you know. This was a perfectly believable story. People do that. People do pawn off their wedding rings when something goes wrong. They sell their wedding rings for a bit of money. They did dig into it a little bit further, but I mean, it's a believable story, and police accepted that explanation and they let him go. And now they were back to square one again. They had no suspects. Police exhausted every line of inquiry in this case, and after 18 months, nothing new was happening, and so they were forced to declare this case a cold case, just like the one that had happened previously. Bear in mind, at this point, the two weren't connected, I don't think. Police didn't think it was the same person that killed the Thomas siblings as the Dixon couple. They were over 4 years apart, and the circumstances were different. You know, one of them was a home invasion in the middle of the night. One of them was a chance attack on a nature trail in the morning. They were both very different. Although they had their similarities, immediately this wasn't something that connected in police's minds. And it seemed as though the bullseye killer was getting away with what they'd done. Not only were they avoiding police capture completely, but they were also fooling police into not connecting the two murders. Both double murders had their own featured segments on a UK TV show called Crime Watch. It's not running anymore, but they used to talk about like unsolved robberies and assaults and even murders, and this show would broadcast...
Because grandma underwear is comfortable. It's the most comfortable underwear I wear. Oh my god. Have you not worn granny panties? Do yourself a favor. Wear granny panties.
Separate phone lines for both different cases, and they got hundreds of calls for each. Hundreds of people ringing in thinking they had leads, but nothing really led anywhere. They remained cold cases. In March of 1996, almost 7 years after Peter and Gwenda Dixon's murder, so this was now over a decade since the first double murder, another horrific incident happened in Pembrokeshire. And Pembrokeshire was usually very quiet. Like I said, it was noted as one of the safest places to live in the whole of the UK in the 80s. However, on this particular day, 6 teenagers were walking through a field when they were confronted by a man dressed in all black, wearing a ski mask and carrying a shotgun. He began yelling at them to lay on the ground, all of them to get on the ground. He began firing shots into the air to intimidate them and scare them, and it worked. All of these 6 teenagers got on the ground. The man then proceeded to sexually assault 2 of the girls in the group, and then demanded the rest of them handed over their possessions, any valuables they had, any money. He robbed them all and then left. Unfortunately, because this man was wearing a ski mask, these teenagers couldn't really tell police anything. They couldn't give a description. Because this was in a field, there was no CCTV, so he wasn't seen coming or going. There was no car of interest. There was very little information to go off of. There was the DNA. Of course, he sexually assaulted these girls, and so they gave over that DNA, but there was no immediate match, and so that was kind of a dead end. And this attack on these teenagers was the start of what would become a series of very frequent, very violent attacks in Pembrokeshire. A series of armed robberies, home invasions, burglaries. And this was a very, very safe area up until this point. And now they were more than ever. I think there was like 50 or 60 different home invasions and burglaries and stuff in a few years span, which is absolutely unheard of for this area. And these break-ins were very obviously committed by the same person. Each one seemed like a cookie cutter of the last. They were all incredibly similar. It was a man in all black, ski mask, shotgun, breaking into mainly women's homes when they knew that they were home alone. And this attacker would get away with their crimes every single time because of this ski mask. They would wear gloves, there was no evidence left behind. They wouldn't let their victim see their face so that they couldn't describe them to the police. And it's absolutely terrifying. I can't imagine what it must have felt like to live in Pembrokeshire at that time, knowing that this person was just out there and there was absolutely nothing that police could do about this. There was nothing happening, there was no suspects, there was nothing going on, and it was just a matter of time until it was your house. And it seemed as though this attacker was just going to keep getting away with this, because what could trip them up at this point? What could give them away? That was until one particular night when a man broke into a local teacher's home and attempted an armed robbery. Sheila Clark was just getting ready for bed one night when a man dressed in all black, ski mask, shotgun in hand, broke into her home and ambushed her. He tied her up and then began searching around her home for things that he could steal. Sheila luckily managed to wriggle her way out of her ties and sounded her house alarm, which then called the police. It alerted everyone in the area that something was going on, and her attacker fled. Again, she didn't see the attacker's face because, of course, the ski mask, and so she couldn't give much information to the police. However, they decided to search the surrounding area right after the attack. And that was when police finally got their first lead on this serial attacker. Just a few streets away from Sheila's home, in a bush, they found a few discarded items from this attacker. There they found a sawn-off shotgun, some black gloves, and a black ski mask. Now, it was unlikely that they were going to be able to identify a perpetrator from just these items. DNA, evidence, forensics weren't quite there at this point. However, this piece of evidence did tell police something, and that was that the attacker was probably local. They were probably living in Pembrokeshire, because it seemed as though they'd fled the scene on foot in order to discard of these items a few streets away. If they lived further away, they were probably going to do this in a car. They were probably going to go to the scene in the car, flee in a getaway car. However, it seemed as though they were fleeing on foot, so they lived close by, most likely. So police focused in on this particular area and began interviewing pretty much every single household that they could in that area, particularly ones that had a male occupant, specifically a male occupant of around the kind of height and kind of general size of what Sheila gave of her attacker. And when police came across one house in particular, they knew they had their guy. Inside this house, they found 2 sawn-off shotguns, a collection of items that seemed to have been the stolen items from all of these women's houses in the area, and hundreds of keys, like house keys, a lot of them matching with the burgled homes in the area. And the owner of this house was a Mr. John William Cooper, that same man that was once a person of interest in the Peter and Gwenda Dixon murders after he pawned off his wedding ring that was suspected to be Peter's stolen wedding ring. The evidence inside Cooper's home connected him to 30 different attacks in the area. Now, police suspected him of way more, possibly up to 100. However, just the evidence in his house could connect him to 30. And while police were still kind of suspicious of him when it comes to the murders, there was no evidence in his house connecting him to the murders. So that was kind of put in a box for now. Right now, they were focusing on all of these home invasions, all of these burglaries that they can charge him for now because there's evidence in his home. John Cooper was given 16 years in prison for all of these attacks that he definitely committed. There were keys in his house for these homes. There were stolen items in there, you know. But police knew that this wasn't the end of John Cooper's crimes. They knew that he was responsible for a lot more, and it was just figuring out what he'd done. So they were looking at all of these different crimes that he definitely committed, that he'd definitely been charged for, the ones that put him in prison at this point. And they realised that these home invasions, these burglaries, bore a lot of similarities to the double murders, both double murders. He seemed to target single women when they were home alone because there was no, in his eyes, there was no intimidation. He felt like he could dominate these women. There was no one that's going to challenge him too much. And if you remember, I said at the beginning, police believed that whoever killed the Thomas siblings did so because they believed that Helen Thomas was home alone, and that was why that house was particularly targeted. The Dixons murders also had a few similarities to all of the home invasions in the Pembrokeshire area, not because Gwenda was home alone. Of course, they were attacked on a trail in the middle of the day. However, the similarity here was the sexual assault, as well as the money motive. Whoever had done this had stolen Peter Dixon's credit card and his wedding ring. This attacker seemed to have two motives, and that was sex and money. So police went back and reopened the cold case files of both of these double murders, and by now it had been well over a decade, and so they decided to redo a lot of the DNA tests because technology, forensic technology, is always improving. Perhaps technology in the present day can pick up something that technology back then in the 80s couldn't find. However, for that exact reason, because these pieces of evidence were so old, it was going to take a long time to get these results back. And so in the meantime, police decided that they were going to conduct a lot of interviews on everyone that knew John Cooper. His friends, his family, work, friends, just his associates, people he met at the pub, literally anyone that knew John Cooper. They wanted to get the best idea of who this man was, what his life was like, what he was like. John William Cooper was born on September 3rd, 1944 in Milford Haven, Wales. He had a very average childhood. He was quite unremarkable in school. He wasn't particularly intelligent, and he ended up dropping out aged 15 just to go into the world of work. He took on various manual labour jobs when he first left school. I think he was just trying to find what he liked the best. He was a builder, he was a carpenter, he was an upholster, and then he eventually got into farming, which is where he stayed. He then kind of stuck to being a farm labourer. In his early 20s, he began seeing a woman named Patricia. Now, he'd actually known Patricia since they were like 12 years old. They met so long ago, and now they eventually, in their 20s, began dating. The two of them fell head over heels in love with each other, and in 1966, when they were both aged 22, they got married. Following their marriage, they had a son named Andrew, or Adrian. I think he goes by both names. I'm not sure which one he prefers. I think I'm just going to call him Andrew in this video. They had a son called Andrew and a daughter named Teresa, and everything was good. Cooper was a very social man. He liked playing darts. He went to the pub often. He had quite a big social life in the pub. And his friends there would describe him as very social, very joyous, very larger than life. And a lot of the women at the pub, even though he had a wife at home, he was quite the flirt. He was very funny, very charismatic to those women. But that was all when he was out in public. However, behind closed doors, John Cooper was a very different man. He was abusive, he was aggressive, he was violent towards his family and his children. His son, Andrew, remembers that he was just 9 years old the first time his father got violent with him, and then it only got more and more frequent after that. He said that Cooper would treat him as though he was an adult. He was 9 years old, but Cooper would discipline him and fight with him, physically fight with him, as though he was an adult, as though this was like just a bar fight that Cooper was getting into. But this was his 9-year-old son. Cooper was a big gambler when he was out at the pub, and he would put a lot of money into gambling, and like I
think it's okay.
He really liked playing darts.
It's my first time working with paint.
And whenever he would have a particularly bad night, he'd lost money or whatever, he would end up taking that out on his family, on his wife and on his children. And his gambling actually went way beyond just darts at the pub. Like I said, he went on a TV game show in an attempt to kind of...
Man, y'all are aggressive on here. I just wanted to wear some comfy underwear and paint. Y'all just want to tear me to shreds.
Spot the Ball is
Y'all got some issues.
Where
got
a
some
screenshot
issues.
is taken from a football match and the actual football is edited out. And the way that you win this game is by putting a little cross on the picture where you think the football would be in that picture. And if your X is in the right spot on the picture, then you win. You win the jackpot, you win money. And John Cooper did exactly that in the 1970s. He won a lot of money about a decade before the murders. He won a car and almost £100,000, and he blew it all.
I just wanted to show you that I completed something today. This was my goal for the day, was to paint, and I did. And y'all got a lot of unregistered hostility towards me.
Just 2 weeks before Peter and Gwenda Dixon
So
murdered, John Cooper appeared on the TV game
I'm gonna
show
let y'all be. Y'all can go talk to y'all's therapist instead of attacking me for my underwear choices. Maybe you should try cotton underwear. It's very comfortable.
And to all of these people,
And yeah, y'all can chill. I did sign it. I put a stupid heart. I don't know why I did that. But yeah, yay, I did something today. I like it. I like the way it looks. It's cool. Very proud of myself.
Cooper's son.
I don't think that I'll do the lines like this again, just because I don't like they look. They don't look the prettiest.
Put a gun to his head.
Like they get kind of rough.
No one likes him. He's not wanted
But
to
maybe it looks cool. I don't know.
And he was telling him all these things. He was shouting horrible things at him, and then
But
suddenly.
yeah, I did something today.
And he begins pulling the trigger back.
Awesome.
On this gun. And
Spent
his
like
son, Andrew,
a lot of fucking money on art supplies today, so I'm glad I actually did something. Probably gonna try doing more of these. I have one more canvas.
Neither of them said a word. And Andrew
I have one more canvas and then a watercolor canvas. And I got oil paints over there. I got watercolors over there. But yeah, look at that. I did something today. I like it. It's cool.
Andrew said that when Cooper got about halfway to the end, he just closed his eyes and he was just peaceful. He thought he was about to die. He thought that his father.
I will do this again. Every time I decide to paint, I'll try and do it live.
He was just waiting.
And I'll make sure to always wear cotton underwear because that seems to piss y'all off. So